While we're not exactly expecting to see Chelsea's manager search end anytime particularly soon, that hasn't stopped the news with pushing forward who seem to be the two main candidates right now. Andoni Iraola on the one hand from Bournemouth in the Premier League and Cesc Fabregas from Como in Italy seem to be the two top names at the moment on the lips of the majority of Chelsea aggregators. So although there are still other names in the frame, these are the two guys that are being pushed in the moment, and we're going to take a little look at who might fit our current project better. Welcome, Blue Believers, to another episode of the Stamford Sync, where we are syncing up with everything Chelsea FC. And it's all about Andoni Iraola and Cesc Fabregas today, at least. Now, that I'm expecting that to change in the future. There's, a lot of talk about Felipe Luis. We know Glasner's available. Alonso seems to be not really being talked about, but he's someone the fandom would definitely like to see. But at the moment, we're just going to focus on who's being talked about in the news right now, and it's Iraola and Cesc Fabregas. PYS posted this via Fabrizio Romano today on Twitter, X, whatever. Chelsea new coach. Their philosophy must be ambition and quality football. Transfer window to include young talents and experienced players. Andoni Iraola would be keen on joining Chelsea. Fabregas is planning next season with Como, and Como think he will stay, but if Chelsea went all in for him, then let's see. Chelsea have not decided yet on which coach to attack for and try to get. So basically just echoing the majority of what we've heard so far, although with Iraola in particular, there was initially some noise that maybe another Premier League move wasn't something that he'd fancy because him and his family were apparently interested in a move back to Spain. Obviously, both Spanish coaches, so it looks like the next coach could well be Spanish. There's a couple of Spanish guys in the frame, at least four that I can think of off the top of my head. So Iraola supposedly keen to remain in the Premier League, and it makes sense. His stock is really high at the moment. He's done an amazing job with Bournemouth, and there is probably a lot of teams that would be interested in him. Chelsea, probably the most high-profile job that's available at the moment, I guess, if he were to stay in the Premier League. But either way, with Fabregas, again, this is just kind of echoing what Fabregas himself has said, with he's only focusing on Como. He said he sees himself at Como next season, but hasn't specifically ruled out joining Chelsea. And like I say, for me, the biggest thing, that they're in very different situations, right? Because Andoni Iraola is leaving Bournemouth at the end of the season. That's already been announced. So it makes more sense that we're hearing potentially Iraola would be interested in staying in the Premier League, and he's able to be a little bit more open about talking about jobs than Fabregas is. Fabregas is 5 points off of the Champions League with Como in Serie A at the moment, and will obviously do nothing to dent their chances. And, if he comes out and being like, yeah, I'm really interested in the Chelsea job, then his players might lose faith and drop a little bit. So, Fabregas in particular is definitely going to be more difficult if he's the one we do decide to go for. So on Iraola in particular, Chelsea Dodgers posted this via Fabrizio Romano. Andoni Iraola would be more than happy to continue in the Premier League. He would be keen on becoming the next Chelsea manager. Nothing decided by Chelsea, as in the early stages, and nothing advanced. And on Cesc Fabregas, he posted this. Cesc Fabregas is very happy at Como and planning next season in terms of new signings, tactics and ideas. We will have to see if Chelsea go all in on him, but my understanding is Como are convinced he will continue with them. Let's see. So it's the let's see thing with Fabrizio Romano, and maybe this is just Romano trying to push the news out, right? Because it's interesting news at the end of the day, isn't it? Fabregas to Chelsea has got a lot more connotation than just a managerial appointment, because obviously he was such a good player for us. So it's, like I say, as of right now, it all seems to make sense. But to be honest, after the initial massive flurry of managers that were all being talked about, Glasner, Xabi Alonso, Xavi Hernandez, Felipe Luis, Marco Silva from Fulham, it seems to be, as of right now, just today, these are the two managers that are being talked about. So with that in mind, I decided to do something a little bit different today. I compare players quite a lot, but it's not very often you get in this kind of situation where you need a new manager. So today we are going to take a look at Andoni Iraola's Bournemouth for this season and Cesc Fabregas' Como, their styles of play, how they treat their teams, the differences and difficulties that they face. We'll do some caveats before we get into the graphic, and ultimately try and make a decision about, regardless of my own personal beliefs, which is going to be difficult because if you've watched my channel before, you know who I want, but just to try and genuinely see, based on the statistics and stuff from how they've done this season with their respective clubs, who would actually be a better fit for Chelsea. But guys, if you have made it this far and you are enjoying my content, please do me the distinct honour of liking and sharing the video, subscribe to the channel, or just roast me in the comments, whatever gets you through your day. Right, so before we jump into the comparisons, there's obviously the big elephant in the room is the caveats between the differences in the leagues that they've been playing in, right? So that, there's kind of positives and negatives for both in this respect. Iraola has the Premier League experience. He has been with Bournemouth for a while now, and they have done really, really well, and his team has been stripped time and time and time again. So in Premier League terms, Bournemouth are not exactly heavy hitters in the transfer market, but in European terms, they are, because they're a mid-table Premier League club. Mid-table Premier League clubs are often able to spend more money than top top teams in other countries just because of the TV rights. So although the Premier League categorically is a more difficult league to be in, Iraola has inarguably had more and better resources to go and get the players that he wants. From Cesc Fabregas' side, the instant thing is, yeah, well, the Italian league's easier than the Premier League. I get that, but the caveats and the nuance with that are, he took a League Two team that hadn't been in the top flight for 20 years as an interim manager, got them into the top flight. Okay, first, really, really impressive. Sixth in his first season with very, very, very little in the way of expenditure and resources, like I was just talking about with Iraola. You know, made good use of loans like Nico Paz from Real Madrid, and now is fighting for Champions League and potentially is looking to take them into Europe for the first time in their history. So, like I say, it's balanced, isn't it? Because, yes, the Italian league is a little bit less strong than the Premier League is, especially because of the financial stuff. So Cesc Fabregas has done an amazing job there with what he's got, but obviously Iraola has done amazing to keep Bournemouth where they are in the Premier League with comparatively less resources in terms of the Premier League. So with all that said and done, I've whipped up this handy dandy little graphic right here. So Fabregas, Como versus Iraola, Bournemouth, a 25-26 comparison. So instead of just going deep into the stats, which I might do in a further video if any of these heats up, we're just going to look at the bigger picture of both clubs, how the managers set up their teams and their styles and stuff. So we'll dive into the categories and we'll start with the league context, and I've kind of mentioned this a little bit already. With Cesc Fabregas at Como, he is in Serie A. As I just said, it is a slightly less competitive league than the Premier League is, and obviously there's a lot less resources. Iraola at Bournemouth, Premier League, mid-table, 9th, and that has been consistent. He's done a really, really good job to be able to keep Bournemouth, who, like I said, in terms of the rest of the Premier League, doesn't have that much resources, but compared to Como, Como would be buzzing with Bournemouth's budget, I'll tell you that for nothing. So we'll move on to their defensive record, right? Because from a Chelsea perspective, this has definitely been, especially recently, the biggest bugbear that we've had, right? Ever since losing Levi Colwill at the start of this season and him not being replaced, we have had like 10 different centre-back pairings this season. Absolutely wild, and our defence has never settled, and we are leaking goals, especially under Liam Rosenior. So, in terms of the defensive record of Cesc Fabregas at Como, his team concedes 0.75 goals per game, which is an elite return, especially considering the available funds and, where they've come from sort of thing. In comparison to that, Iraola at Bournemouth concedes between 1.3 and 1.5 goals per game, which is average in the Premier League, right? Now, that is, we'll get into it into a minute, but that is largely due to Iraola's style of play. It's very chaotic. It's, it's basketball. It's back and forward. It's, kind of what Liam Rosenior was trying to do, but obviously wasn't very good at. He attacks a lot, and because of the high press, it makes them a little bit more suspect defensively, but they are good at scoring goals. So the average possession for Cesc Fabregas at Como is 55 to 60%, which is really high. And that is the kind of possession stats that we are used to having. Now, the issue with that in a Chelsea respect is we've had a lot of pedestrian possession, right? Possession that doesn't always necessarily lead to something. Teams let us have the ball because we struggle to do anything with it. With Maresca, we would have the ball for 60% of the game because we would funnel it out to the wingers, and then it would be passed back to the fullbacks or into the midfield. It'd get recycled a lot all of the time until the right opening appeared, but it didn't often happen. We were very, very, very suspect against a low block. So I like the idea of possession play, but it's really difficult to do possession play really, really well at the end of the day. In comparison to Iraola, he only has 48 to 52% possession, which is a moderate amount for the Premier League in general, and makes sense with his kind of style of football, right? Because he's a lot more transitional, he's a lot more high pressing, and control of the ball isn't necessarily something that Iraola goes for with his games. Now, Liam Rosenior seemed to be tried to be somewhere in the middle of these. He wanted to play out from the back and control the game, but he also wanted to press high and be able to transition into attacks. So I think that probably was what sealed his fate at the end of the day, wasn't it? We don't have the squad to be able to pull off that absolutely amazing feat of football to play both of these styles at the same time. So the build-up style, again, this is kind of as you would expect. Cesc Fabregas, obviously being from, Arsene Wenger, Pep Guardiola, really, really about controlled football. They play positional, controlled, build-up style of play. Iraola is a lot more direct and vertical because he wants things to happen quickly. So already what I'm seeing here, Cesc Fabregas seems to suit the team that was built. Because this is the problem, isn't it? Like, the managers haven't built this team. The sporting directors and the ownership wanted to build a team that control games, essentially. Pochettino is actually a good example of a similar style of football to Andoni Iraola, but our team has changed a lot since then as well. The pressing intensity. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. So Cesc Fabregas and Como, it's like a medium press. So they're not pressing really, really, really high, and that makes sense because they want to have the ball more than they want to be attacking people to get it, right? Iraola is a high presser. So the worry about that for me me is we don't have the players to really pull that off, and we've seen it. And now, I guess you could argue quite easily, Iraola, clearly a better manager than Liam Rosenior. But I look at our current defence, and if we don't absolutely sort that out, I think that's going to be a problem. And you look at the centre-backs that we're targeting and stuff, the likes of Van Heck and Murillo, they maybe both each play, Van Heck maybe suits Fabregas a little bit more, and Murillo maybe suits Iraola a little bit more. So I'm just a little bit stung by the high press, but I'm also very bored of the slow pedestrian passing. So this is a difficult one, but like I say, for me at the moment, it seems like Fabregas's style of play is more similar to Maresca's, where Iraola seems to be kind of another take on the Pochettino style of football. And tell me what you think in the comments about whether we have the guys to play that already, with the guys that we've got coming in, like Omega and Quenda as well, and how much would that change who we go out for in the transfer window. Next up, the tempo of the game, as you would expect with Cesc Fabregas, is slow and controlled, and with Iraola, it is fast and chaotic. So there's upsides and downsides to both of these, right? Slow and controlled football can equal boring football, quite pedestrian passing, difficult to watch. Fast and chaotic can be really, really, really exciting to watch, but it can make you leak goals as well. So that's a really difficult one. And in its pomp, we kind of saw that with Pochettino, right? We had great attacking impetus under Pochettino, and we had that high press, and it was all about running and it was all about energy, but we did concede quite a lot of goals. Pochettino did well to get us into sixth, but if he'd have been a little bit more controlled, we might have been there a little bit earlier, so it is an interesting one. Chance creation. Cesc Fabregas prefers structured and positional chance creation against Iraola's transition-heavy and volume-based. So the ball is moving fast, right? The ball is moving fast in order to create chances, as many as possible with Andoni Iraola, but with Cesc Fabregas, he prefers to craft his chances. So again, we're seeing links here to Cesc Fabregas definitely be feeling a bit more similar to Maresca. And the thing about that is they spent a long time hiring the manager when Maresca came in, and they identified Maresca's style of football as the kind of thing that they want to see. So I do think that going for Iraola at the moment, from what we've seen, would be a massive indicator that they are looking to do things differently at the end of the day. So the style of football would change, and that is maybe something that a lot of fans want to see, because possession-based football can be quite boring unless it's being successful. So we move on to the XG profile, and Fabregas' Como are defensively solid, and they are overperforming their XG slightly. So that is good, and that means that his slow possessional football isn't necessarily always boring, and they are finding ways to craft their goals. Now we move on to Iraola, and this is where it gets difficult, because they've got really high XG for and against, right? So they are creating lots of chances, they are scoring lots of their expected goals, but they're also conceding lots of expected goals from the other teams as well. So like I said, Iraola, it's just basketball, do you know what I mean? It's back and forth, and that is, the defence is where it comes down to for me. We haven't got the defenders as of right now, so would our defence need a bigger overhaul than it currently does if we were looking at maintaining the more sort of control possession-based football, then moving into Iraola, and it sounds like he would need a very different type of centre-back from the ones that we've currently got. The defensive shape, compact mid-block from Cesc Fabregas' Como, and a high line and aggressive press from Iraola. So again, the high-line aggressive press worries me a little bit, just because we've seen it with Liam Rosenior and the players weren't buying into it. But the truth of the fact about that is maybe they just weren't buying into Liam Rosenior, and Andoni Iraola has obviously got amazing performances out of who you would argue are technically less gifted players. So if Andoni Iraola's man management can get better performances out of the team, then maybe it is possible to go for that aggressive high-pressing football. But just based on the serious amount of goals we've been leaking recently, it's a little bit scary, isn't it? Like, you remember the goal against PSG where Cole Palmer nearly scored, we got completely cut open and conceded like 5 seconds later. Absolute joke. Okay, attacking width. So Cesc Fabregas prefers wide positional play, which again is very similar to Maresca, although I don't think he puts so much emphasis on the wingers to do that. I think Cesc Fabregas prefers his fullbacks to get wide and allows his wingers to get inside, but width is still really important. And Iraola prefers narrow, explosive, wide attacks in transition. So Iraola isn't always just like funneling the ball out to the wingers and the fullbacks and holding it there. He is, it's very rarely staying in one place at one time, essentially, from the research that I've done anyway. Game control is high for Cesc Fabregas at Como. It's high and he dictates the rhythm. He likes to be in control of the game. With Iraola, it's low to medium and he embraces the chaos. So like this is all just painting the picture of two very different styles of football that we'd be looking at, and I do find it interesting that these are the two that are being talked about the most at the moment, because it really represents either continuing with the core idea that they've tried to build the team with from the beginning when Bluco took over of playing controlled football, or we do just completely move on to this, explosive, aggressive, high transition style of football, which could lead to a lot more goals, but could leave us suspect defensively unless we get good reinforcements. And the watchability I've put here because I think it's just interesting depending on the type of football you like to watch. If you like to see your team dominate a game in possession and do it well, Fabregas seems to be the guy for that. But if you prefer the basketball level football, the drama, the jeopardy of nearly scoring as much as you can see, because like I said earlier, Iraola has got high XG for and against that Bournemouth team. But it's intensity, it's chaos. If you like that kind of thing, just from a watchability and aesthetic point of view, what kind of football do you like to watch? Let me know in the comments. So we're going to take a little look at the key strengths of both managers and see who would suit. Control and structure seems to be Fabregas. Like I say, he wants his team to dictate play. He wants to be in control. He wants to have high possession. Premier League readiness, Iraola. He's been in the Premier League for a while. He knows how it works. He knows the teams he's coming up against. He understands the physicality. Fabregas does to an extent because he's been a player, but from a managerial perspective, which is ultimately what we're looking at, Iraola takes that one. Pressing intensity, that's Iraola every single day. That is his style of football, and Fabregas and Como have been playing like a medium press, and that is not a big part of their game. Defensive organisation, Fabregas' Como have been good at not leaking lots of goals, which is impressive from a team that ultimately haven't had a huge amount of new players come in. It's not really easy for them to go out and just get the players that they want. So that says to me that Fabregas' man management of those defenders has been going really well. And as we know with Iraola, he obviously prioritises getting lots of attacks in as frequently as possible, and that can leave the defence open. Chaos and attacking upside. Fabregas, not so much, not so chaotic, a little bit slower, a little bit more controlled. With Iraola, it is going to be explosive and wild all the time, and I don't know if my heart can take that, to be honest, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to what's going to win us games, doesn't it? And the long-term possession identity, obviously, and this is all kind of speaking to the same thing, but if we want to see control going forward, Fabregas is the guy. If we want to see chaos, high risk, high reward, then Iraola is the guy. So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because what we're not looking at necessarily is which manager is better than the other manager. I think it is unbelievable what Cesc Fabregas has managed to do in his very short time in management at the moment, but you can't argue that he's got as much experience as Iraola, but ultimately it seems like what we're looking at is just two very different types of football. So guys, tell me what you think. What kind of football? It's not even necessarily about what manager. What kind of football do you want to see at Stamford Bridge? Do you want to continue with more controlled, possession-style football, playing out from the back, not necessarily creating loads of chances all the time, but hopefully being more clinical with them? Or do you want to see Iraola's basketball, back and forth, high risk, high reward football? It's difficult because I've actually said in a video recently, I think we need to stop this playing out from the back thing. But at the same time, Fabregas has proven when it works, it works. And when you do it right, you do it right. The issue we've had, Maresca's style of football didn't favour our strikers at all very well. It spent so much time out on the wings, and our wingers weren't really good enough to pull it off. The ball spent so much time with centre-backs and so much time with deep midfielders and stuff, and being recycled a lot, and it was really boring to watch, even though it did bear results sometimes. And before this, I thought I was up for the more aggressive, more transitional style of football, but then I remember how difficult it was watching the Pochettino game sometimes, and I'm like, do we even have the squad to go back to that? So that's it, guys. That is the end of the comparison today. For me personally, I'm staying consistent. It's still Fabregas. I still want to see him in. I think that the job that he's done at Como is just absolutely unbelievable. I do like possession style football and patterns of play and triangles when it works, right? And Fabregas has got experience of playing in those types of teams as well as managing them. The other thing that's interesting about Fabregas is he's played for some of the best managers of all time. Arsene Wenger, Pep Guardiola, Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, even though he didn't particularly favour him, he was still part of that squad and he will have absorbed something. So I do think it's really interesting because if you look at how well Xabi Alonso did, he attributed a lot of the way he plays his football to the fact that he'd worked under so many good managers. And you would have thought that even though Cesc Fabregas is kind of favouring this positional, possession-based style of football at the moment, based on his time with managers like Jose Mourinho and Antonio Conte, he knows that there is a time for transition. He knows that there's a time for defence, and his defensive record is actually really good too. So guys, get it in my comments. Fabregas versus Iraola. And that's not to say that these are the only two candidates, but as I said at the beginning of the video, they are the most talked about at the moment. Nice one, guys. Thank you very much for sticking around to the end of the video. If you did, I'll catch up with you all very, very soon. Take it easy. Peace.